Welcome to Civics Mix. My name is Susan Haig, and I'm founder and creative director of Civic Story.
And I'm Tamika, Cody, multimedia journalist of Civic Story.
And joining us today is Dr. Betty Livingston Adams, historian, author, and 30-year resident of Summit. Welcome, Dr. Adams.
Thank you very much.
Your life has encompassed so many paths that there's a lot to talk about and ask you about. I'd love to know, how did you decide to focus on math and science when you were in high school?
Well, Susan, I came up in the Cold War science era when all of the focus was on science and math, and we had to get to the moon before anyone else. So naturally, I focused on math and science. And in fact, when I graduated from high school, I was the Bell Labs Science Student of the Year.
Wow.
And everyone knew that I was going to be the next great scientist.
Expectations.
And then I went to college, and one day found myself in the laboratory trying to do a chemical titration that wasn't working. I looked outside the window, the sun was shining, the grass was green, and I thought, what am I doing in this lab? And at that moment decided I needed a different direction and became an English literature major of all things, which was a delight until I had the wonderful opportunity to spend an entire summer at Columbia University studying Alexander Pope. I thought, this is too much. I should also explain, by the time I finished college, the world had changed a bit. The emphasis was no longer on science and math. And indeed, it was the era of social activism on campus, and the exciting people were in the arts and humanities. And I thought, that's where I want to be.
How did you make it into corporate America? Can we talk a little bit about that?
At the time we moved to the Chicago area, corporations were looking for women to come into the managerial ranks. And I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. And I say that I happened to be in the right place at the right time, which is not really accurate. There were people who were pointing me in the right place. Someone would always say to me, go and stand over there. And when I stood there, good things happened. Not that I knew what would happen, but good things did happen. And that is the way I got into a highly technical corporation and spent 25 years actually working for that corporation.
So there was an interesting bridge from being an English major to corporate life, and that was pursuing a PhD in history. To me, that sounds like 7-8 years of scholarship in the basement of a library. What was that process like for you? Did you love it overall, or was it too much as well?
Oh, I loved it. I was so focused when I left undergraduate school as an English major and deciding that I really wanted to be a history major. Again, from math and science to English to history. And I was fortunate enough to enter a doctoral program at Yale University in New Haven, Connecticut, and enrolled and met the most exciting scholars and professors, and it was just wonderful. I should add that my first 4 months in New Haven, having moved from Louisiana, I bought 4 coats. I arrived and I thought, okay, I have a heavy coat for winter. And then 2 weeks later, I had to buy another. This is as cold as it's going to get, I said to myself. So yes, so it was quite an adjustment in terms of weather. And at that point, Yale had its first women's undergraduate class coming in. And although there had been women in the graduate school for years, suddenly the university said, oh, there are women on campus. But I enjoyed that. I pursued my doctoral program, got the degree, and became an assistant professor in a history department. And it was at that point that I was married and we were moving, and I thought, okay, as much as I love teaching and research, it wasn't something that I could see myself being able to pursue. And entered the corporate world.
As a woman of color, what were some of the challenges in corporate America as well as being at a pristine college?
There were There were challenges. One of the things I think that helped me is that I had 3 older brothers.
Oh, good.
And growing up, I did whatever my brothers did, and I did it even better. So I was accustomed to being in these male spaces and having men make these comments. And I must admit, I think I was naive in many respects because I did not take them seriously.
Good.
Because I thought, okay, yes, they'll just see that I know what I'm doing and it will all go away.
You didn't take your brother seriously or the men?
Both.
Okay.
Because I had not taken my brothers too seriously.
Got it. Okay.
I didn't take the men around me too seriously when they said, well, you know, we've never had a woman doing this before. And we've never had a person of color doing this before. And I thought, well, you've got one now.
Right. That humor helps. Humor helps. Before leaving the Yale situation, how did you decide on your dissertation? Some topic grabbed you there. Can you just tell us?
Well, I just had one of the best professors and advisors, someone who actually picked me to be his advisee. And he was a leading historian, endowed professor, had written everywhere. And when someone picks you to be his student,
Can you share his name?
C. Van Woodward. Probably no one remembers him these days, but he was one of the leading historians on race relations and the New South. He was a Southern historian.
And what were those skills from your PhD that translated into corporate life?
Well, what I discovered, and I'm glad you asked that question because I must admit from my undergraduate work as an English major into history, learning to write and communicate were the most important skills.
Those skills carried you through 25 years in many various jobs
And they're taking, and into my writing my book.
Right.
They also carried me into the Master of Divinity program at Drew. And I think what I'm saying is, you know, as I point out to my students, you can find a fact on Wikipedia, but do you know the information, what's behind it? Can you use that in some way to create new knowledge? And that really is what I did with this book. And I must admit, writing this book was partly a way for me to get through the technical world for 25 years and still keep myself in the reading and analysis business.
And I'm pretty sure the audience wants to know what the title of the
Oh,
book is. So let's give them a snapshot of that. Your book the title is Black Women's Christian Activism: Seeking Social Justice in a Northern Suburb, which was published just this year.
Yes, published this year. And again, one of those opportunistic things in my life. This is a year when we're talking about social justice everywhere. And to have the book come out at the very same time, I mean, it's like so much of my life. Someone just told me, stand there. I think someone just said, publish this book this year. And there it is.
And I had the pleasure of hearing your book talk recently, and you said the topic just found you. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, I moved to Summit over 30 years ago, quite by accident. It was corporate relocation for 18 months, and after going through that, I thought I'll never move again. And I ended up spending a lot of time in the library just trying to understand this unique little space in which I live. I had no idea that there would be enough information on an African American community in this overwhelmingly white space that would ever become a book. But I was so curious about these women, again, asking questions, trying to understand the race, class, gender spaces I found around me. And accreting information, you know, it's like shards of information here and there. And I'd put them in file folders, put them aside. And these women then would speak to me and say, there's a story, there's a story.
Yes. And these women were?
Violet Johnson, who was a Baptist laywoman and domestic servant, and Reverend Florence Randolph, who was a seamstress and African-American Zion pastor, ordained pastor. And these women, from the early 1900s through 1940, we're talking about social justice, rights for women, gendered spaces, racialized spaces, education, housing, and are not those the topics that
we're discussing right now
Exactly.
in 2016?
And both Violet and Florence were right here in Summit, building communities, changing their communities.
And
what drove them? What drove their decisions?
Well, they entered Summit. Violet Johnson came following her employers from Brooklyn. Florence Randolph was appointed to this fledgling church. As she says, she was always given these small churches, and then once she got them going, a male was appointed the pastor, and she moved on to something else. So somehow these women came here, and they looked around and saw the spaces and said, this is not just. So their whole focus was on moral institutions and just laws, not for themselves, but for succeeding generations. So they strove through that conviction that, yes, indeed, we can have just laws, moral institutions, and create spaces for all people to be included.
So Violet was, in a sense, the founder of
Oh, not
Fountain Baptist Church.
Not
is that-
only in a sense, she actually arrived in town and decided that she was going to organize a space for African American workers. And most of them were domestic workers working in the homes and hotels. And she organized that, and people gravitated toward that. And that was the first African American institution in this suburban site. And what's important here, I think, is not only that these women did that in Summit, but that is really the story of suburbanization in the Northeast. Domestic servants, coachmen, and all of that at the turn of the century, who decided, I am here and I need to do something to make this space more just.
And Reverend Florence Spearing Randolph was appointed to lead Summit's African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church, the church that we know today at Wallace Chapel.
And as I said, she was appointed, it was a fledgling church. She was appointed, and she thought, of course, once I get this up and running, and I'll be sent somewhere else. She actually, during the Great Depression, managed to build a church and a community house that became an institutional church. And only, I think, within the last 5 years, the actual building was added to the National Historic Register. So it is there and it really stands. So these women were just remarkable. And I must say, during my years in the corporate environment, they were an inspiration to me. And I kept thinking, if they could do that in that town, thrive and survive, then surely there's nothing as I walk through these doors of this building that will defeat me. And I think the book is an inspiration, and it's an inspirational story that says sometimes we find ourselves not in the places we choose, but when we are there, there's always something that we can do. And I think my own journey points to that, because I really did not choose the places. Somehow, yet I found myself there, and here I am, talking to the two of you. So thank you.
And to think that they were mentors and inspirers over all these years.
Well, I found them, and I mean, it's not that anyone talked about them.
Yeah,
they were hidden
right.
in the pages.
Yeah.
They were marginalized.
Yeah.
They were like so many women's stories. And I should add this, when I was in graduate school, trying to choose a dissertation topic, came to the view then in the 70s was there were really no women's stories to write about. So in the intervening years, from the time I left Yale to the time I wrote the book, the entire scholarship has changed in terms of what women do, what they contribute, and the questions that scholars have raised by looking at marginalized groups and women. And it's from that energy on the margins, I think, that we can learn things. So it's to say to anyone, wherever you are, if you are feeling marginalized and alone, there is some reason that you are there. And if you need to, read this book about these women and what they did, and it really is an inspiration.
Well, Dr. Adams, this was great. Thank you so much for your insight. And can you just let our audience know where we could buy your book?
Go online, look for Black Women's Christian Activism Seeking Social Justice in the Northern Suburbs, or Google in my name, Betty Livingston Adams.
And Dr. Adams, next time we'll talk, we'll fill in one little detail, and that is a Master's of Divinity at Drew University. But for now, you have enlightened us, and thank you so much for being with us.
Did you see anyone brought this? Is this your bird?
We'd do anything for kids. Yet 1 in 6 children in the U.S. struggle with hunger. Help end childhood hunger near you. Learn how at feedingamerica.org.
Welcome back. I'm Tamika Cody with Civics Mix, multimedia journalist for Civic Story.
And I'm Susan Haig, Creative Director of Civic Story. And with us today is Susan Permahos, who is Library Director of the Summit Free Public Library. Welcome, Susan. We are delighted to be here, and you have an active set of programs going on over there. We'd like to start with what got you going Back in high school, you began thinking of being a teacher.
Correct.
What caused that to happen?
That was one of the three choices that were available to young women at my time. Not necessarily the only three choices, but was certainly the way we were geared with our faculty and our guidance counselors. We were told we could be nurses, secretaries, or teachers. So I didn't like blood, and I didn't want to be a secretary, and I decided, all right, I'll be a teacher.
But you also had some inspiring teachers along the way.
I certainly did. I had some wonderful teachers, and some that I remember very fondly still to this day, absolutely.
Looking at your resume, you have an extensive career in the library world. What led you to become a librarian?
It came about in part because I got a part-time job at the New York Public Library while I was in college, and they placed me in a small branch in Staten Island at the very tip of Staten Island, the Tottenville community, which at that time was still semi-rural. Across the street from the library was a feed store. And I went to college in Manhattan, so I had to take the subway from school and the ferry and the Staten Island Rapid Transit all the way to Tottenville, which was the last stop, and then walk to the library. But it was such a wonderful community, such a beautiful Carnegie building, of course, built with the Carnegie funds. And from the very beginning, it was just someplace I felt very comfortable. I loved the idea that we had people of all ages. We had children coming in for story time, and we had senior citizens and parents and so forth. The library at that time was a different kind of a place. Of course, there were no computers. We checked out, I was a clerk, so I checked out the books. And we checked out books using what they called a regiscope. Everything was manual. We created the overdues manually by crossing off numbers and so forth. But what I liked the most was the people, all the different ages, and the opportunity to be able to work with the different ages throughout each day.
And can we talk about some of the misconceptions that everybody has about librarians?
Sure.
You read a lot, don't you?
Yeah.
You love to read.
I do now. I actually do now. Absolutely now.
But it wasn't a great love of books that
When,
drove you to be
no, people assume because you became a librarian it was because you loved books. And I was a good student, and I read whatever I needed to read for school, but I didn't necessarily do a lot of leisure reading, certainly not in high school and college. I didn't have much time. I worked and I went to school, so I really only had time to do that.
Along the way, you did become a teacher of first and third grade. What did you love most about that?
Oh, whatever they would say would just, whatever came out of their mouth. Sometimes things that maybe their mom and dad didn't want us to know about, but it was great, and they were really great. And I'm still friends with some of my former students on Facebook.
Great.
So that's a great thing. That's
So
fun.
You got a Master's of Library Science.
Yes.
Which is a 2 or 3 year degree?
It was 36 credits.
36
Of course,
credits.
I went at night, so it takes a little longer.
It sounds like it would be very technical. Was it a thrill for you? What do you recall about it? What jumps out when you think back?
You have to spend a lot of time in the library. So I spent a lot of time in Alexandra Library at Rutgers University on a Sunday. I was actually, part of the time I was already married, so my husband would come with me, and he would bring his New York Times, and he would sit and read his New York Times, and I had certain things you have to familiarize yourself with certain reference materials and so forth.
One of the positions on your resume that really intrigued me, corporate librarian. It wasn't a long stint, but what was the most exciting and compelling thing that you had to do while you were on that job?
I had to spend a lot of time at the New York Stock Exchange, the American Stock Exchange, and so forth, researching stock offerings, documents. So I had to find a firm that was doing a very similar type of project to what my law firm was working on at that time.
And which law firm?
Cravath, Swaine and Moore. Now, the interesting thing about Cravath, Swaine and Moore, which is a very well-known firm for people in that area, is that they were the firm working on the IBM case back at that period, and they had an office dedicated strictly to that case, which was in White Plains near IBM. And that was when they were trying to break up IBM for being too large a company. But there were famous people that were attorneys there, and so that was also exciting. I worked with Ed Cox, Tricia Nixon's husband, and I worked with him when their first child was born, and so of course that was on the news, and got to share that information with him, which was that was fun. You know, FAO Schwartz the third worked there, so it was quite a large and important law firm.
As Tamika referenced, the number of different job titles is really fascinating because one thinks librarian. So here's one, Borough Community Specialist. What did that mean at the New York Public Library?
I was the specialist in charge of outreach. I went to nursing homes and brought books to the nursing homes. I did book discussions at the nursing homes. I went to the prison and I did a pre-release program for prisoners, telling them about what they could get from the library. I'm sure it would be their first stop when they left prison, but
Maybe it might have been.
but we did have a lot of job information at the library and so forth, and so I would go to the prison and I would tell them that and the kinds of information they could get at the library. I also purchased foreign language materials for all of the 12 branches in Staten Island. We started the first literacy program for the branches in Staten Island at that time, and also ESL. And we had ESL programs in all of the boroughs. And one of the things that we loved to talk about was that we had an Israeli carpooling with an Arab going to one of our ESL classes. So, you know, we just thought we were helping world peace at that time with our ESL program.
In this day and age of technology where everybody's now getting their books on the iReaders and their gadgets, what's the difference? What is the major change that you've seen today compared to when you know, back in the day when you were in the libraries?
Well, originally we basically were warehoused books, and we did have long playing records, if anyone knows what those look like. They don't. Children, I guess, don't know what they look like at all. And then we moved to cassettes, and we even had 8-track tapes for a while. That didn't last very long. But we're no longer a warehouse for books, and we do have books. We still have books, and we still circulate over 300,000 items.
And are people still checking them out,
Oh,
though?
absolutely.
Okay.
Our circulation in the Summit is enormous. DVDs are still, there's no more Blockbuster, there's no more Hollywood Video, but there's still our library that circulates. 25% of our circulation that goes out is DVDs, video games, compact discs, playaways, which are audiobooks. 25% of what we check out are non-print items. We've seen the numbers change recently where the ebooks really spiked a couple of years ago. But it's kind of leveled off and the books are back up again.
Yeah.
So people have come back to books.
I'm one of those people. I remember I was reading, I think it was the Malcolm X book, and on my Kindle, and then it died. And I was in the part where I was like, oh goodness. And then I ran to the bookstore to purchase it. Yeah, and then from then, I was like, okay, I always make sure that I always purchase the physical book. That's just what I like.
Of course, the young children still like the books, although you do see them, I know you see them in the supermarket. Mom gives them the cell phone or an iPad to hold, and they know how to use it, which is astounding to me. But when they come in, they're still taking out stacks and stacks of books.
And it seems that libraries have really, really diversified their programming and now fulfill many roles in the community. Do you see it that way? What are, on a given day, what are all the different things people are doing there?
Oh my goodness. We serve a lot of different populations. We serve, of course, with the children, we have all kinds of story times, including Spanish story time. and we have story time for different age groups. We have an after-school program for the middle schools. We have STEAM and STEM, and we have a 3D printer and iPads where they do technology things. We have computer kits, robot kits. They make robots. But then with the adults, for instance, we have some computer training classes coming up for Excel and Word. We're doing an interview class, helping people to interview for jobs. We have a special program coming up for small business owners, which is something we have done a number of things with small business owners. And this one is actually being run by the New Jersey Department of Taxation, helping with small business questions. So we're trying to serve a lot of different populations. Of course, we have senior citizens. We do a book discussion group with a volunteer at the senior housing. We have a book discussion group in the library. We have lectures, movies, music,
Lots.
hands-on workshops. When I first went to New York Public Library, and then when I did get my library degree, and then I went back as a librarian after teaching, I had to take workshops. New York Public Library gives top quality training to their employees, and it's like taking another college course. And you have to write papers and go for lectures and so forth. And I had assignments, and my assignments were that I had to plan a program for my library, and it was I didn't know what to do because we did some programming in those days, but not to what we're doing now. And now we try to cover a lot of different populations, and programming is just phenomenal. We have so much programming going on.
I have a question as we're nearing our close. I see library director in Springfield, library director in Summit, assistant director, library director in Elmwood Park Library. What is your vision as a director, number one? And also, can you tell us about that rain garden? You're modeling something as part of what you do in the community.
Well, that's another one of our roles is educational. And when we had the opportunity to put in the rain garden, we were very happy to be able to do that because we always want to have an educational component. We have a big poster on our board explaining the steps of doing a rain garden. We had a program in the library telling people how they might do their own rain garden. But as the library director, I have to admit I cannot tell you what the best-selling books are right now. That's not part of what I do. We have great, wonderful staff that does that. But my position is hiring and budgeting and trying to move all these pieces around and trying to encourage as many different things as we do and try to reach out to the community. That's a large part of what I do is community outreach and meeting with the other entities in town, and of course in Summit there's so many.
And your big picture, do you see the use of libraries growing in the next 5, 10, 15 years? How does it relate to our democracy, for instance? Center of learning, right?
It is, there is no reason that it shouldn't. It's not happening in every community. And Summit, we have, we maintained and now increased again our use. And I think it has a lot to do with our outreach into the community. If we want to sit back and just be a book warehouse, usage will go down, but we're not seeking to do that. That's not in our long-range plan. Our plan is to continue to be a vital part of the community, and I think that we're finding that people are finding us, obviously.
Great.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us, and Susan, thank you so much for joining us and letting us know about your fabulous career as a librarian. And hope to see you back here soon.
Well, thank you.
And all the
Thank you
best
very
as
much.
Summit Library flourishes.
Yes, thank you.